We'll say good morning, beautiful day ahead of us today, beginning by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Shumer and Droshos in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach, Zechariah ben Zechariah, as well as to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, a sponsorship for Arvei Pesachim, Maishi and Chavi Abramson for dedicating the entire parak as a zechus for the Fuah Shalema for Daniel Meir ben Chana. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. So we have an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Yud 110. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Kuf Yud 110. We left off at Tanu Rabbanon. So Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. So we'll say we are continuing on the topic of zugos, right? The topic of pairs. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanu Rabbanon, Shose Kiflayim. If a person goes ahead and drinks two cups, Damal Birosho. Literally, again, his blood is on his head, which also means that you're responsible for anything catastrophic which occurs to you. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Masai. So we'll say, actually, what I should just do, I mentioned this in passing yesterday, but I should just mention the following. So remember, this Gemara today, for the most part, we're going to be focusing on this concept of zugos. Right? Zugos, as we talked about yesterday, means pairs. We're going to go with the general idea that the issue of zugos is one of dualism, right? Of avoiding things which have the appearance of giving allegiance to two different gods. That's bepashtos what we're going to focus on over here. Now, I will say, the way zugos work, so to speak, I don't know how zugos work, but the way zugos work is apparently if you do things in pairs, what ends up happening is you give power to the shadim, or you allow for the shadim to harm you. So in general, I'm going to send this out a little bit later, but on the chat. But there's obviously the whole discussion regarding shadim and all of these things is part of a much bigger philosophic debate within Yiddishkeit. For example, the Rambam, our Gemara clearly indicates that the shadim have a power, and these concepts of zugos absolutely apply, which again we'll get into. But I just want to point out that, for example, there's the position of the Rambam. So the Rambam points out in Perish HaMishnayis, he quotes in Meseches Avodah Zarah, Daf Pei Daled. So the Rambam writes as follows. He says this whole idea, this is again much bigger for our topic. I just want to read to you. He says, D'chol inyani hakochavim, va'kisha, va'ashbaz, va'mazalos aruchnis, va'shedim, va'gadas ha'asidos, ume'onein, ume'nachesh, u'she'ilas ha'meisim, rov b'nei adam nifsim, bazeh pitwei gadol, umechashvim sheyishlam inyanim amitiyim. V'choshin shein dvar amitiyim elishem asur mitzad Torah. So the Rambam writes, he says, people think that a lot of these concepts we discuss have legitimacy. He says they have no legitimacy. The Rambam says there's no such thing as shadim or shadim that have power or this sorcery. He says, you'll say, but the Torah asers all of this sorcery stuff, mechashef alo sechaya, all these things. The Rambam says that's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not want us drawn after them. So remember, what the Rambam says is something very important. Just because the Gemara says something, just because the Torah says something that is asur, doesn't mean that it has legitimacy, which is an interesting way to look at it. In other words, the Torah prohibits sorcery. So I would assume from that, based on that obviously there's something to this sorcery, and the Torah is saying you can't do it. The Rambam says no. The Torah is saying you can't engage in sorcery, not because sorcery has any legitimacy to it, not because there's any such thing as sorcery, but because the Moshe does not want us getting drawn after these things and sidetracked. So again, I'm just pointing this out, that the Rambam often will have a hard time dealing with Gemaras like ours, because our Gemara is going to spend a blot of Gemara, more than a blot of Gemara, talking about zugos. That's a lot of airtime for something that, quote unquote, doesn't have legitimacy. Okay, so we're going to discuss it more. I'm just pointing out the Shitas HaRambam in this, which stands in kind of contradistinction to everyone else. And anyway, the Gemara says, if you drink zugos, you're chayiv for your own life. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Imasai, when is that so? Bisman shelo ra pnei hashuk, when you did not go outside in between cups. In between cups. In other words, the only issue of zugos is when you drink 2 cups in one sitting. But if you drink a cup of wine and then you go out in the middle, then you come back and drink another, that's not called zugos, which I will say makes sense. Again, so there's nothing esoteric to that. Why is that not called zugos? You're breaking it up. I will say, by the way, the same way we saw even Alt Brachas, right? We saw this. That even if you're eating and you leave your house, that could bring your active achila to an end. So it breaks up the zugos as well. But ultimately, again, if you go outside in between cups, you could drink zugos. Ravashi, Chazina Rav Chananya Bar Bibi, the akol kasa, have a nafik v'chazi ape shuka. Ravashi said, I saw that Rav Chananya, whenever he would drink, after every single cup of wine, he would go out into the shuk. He would go out into the marketplace. In other words, to his makbid, to go ahead and interrupt in between the cups by going outside. V'lo amran ela lotzeis laderach. And I will say furthermore, when are zugos problematic? Zugos are only problematic if you're going out to travel. If you're going out to travel, if you look at the Rashbam says velo amran. It's the last three of the short lines. Demari le zugos ela lotzeis laderach. Avalamod bebeso leslanba. Only times zugos are problematic, Rabbi says, is when you're going to do something. So in other words, if a person's going to drink 2 cups of wine and then go out to travel, that's when the zugos could put you in danger. In other words, if I go with the idea that zugos represents some type of philosophical allegiance to dualism, and it gives the shadim some type of power over me, in general, shadim only have the ability, if you subscribe to the concept of shadim, we'll say, again, this goes back to the beginning of Maseches Brachos. Shadim only have the power over you when you put yourself b'makom sakana. We'll say this goes back to Brachos Daf Vav. You remember Brachos Daf Vav? Excellent, right? Remember, you're not allowed to go into a ruin, right? Gemara said 3 reasons you can't go into a ruin. But one of the reasons you can't go into a ruin is mipnei shadim. Because ruins always have a danger of collapse. Shadim have power over us when we put ourselves in danger. So the Gemara therefore says, if you're drinking zugos and staying in your house, not a problem. But if you're drinking zugos and then going out to travel, that's when there's the potential for trouble. Amrav Zera Velishan, what about going to sleep? So can I drink zugos and then go to sleep? Kilat says laderech dami. So we'll say going to sleep is like traveling. In other words, going to sleep is considered to be sakana. Like Shavuot say, is such a profound statement. What does that mean? That going to sleep is like going out to travel? Shavuot say, what the Gemara is saying is, any time in life that you're not engaged in dynamic activity, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. So if I'm traveling, again, generally if I'm traveling, I can't learn, I can't do chesed, okay, so I'm traveling. That's danger. Well, that's active danger because you subject yourself to the circumstances around you. Going to sleep is also dangerous. Why? Because when I sleep, although it's a necessity, I'm not in a state of dynamic activity, which I will say such a profound yisod. The only time you're truly safe in life is when you're engaged in growth. But if you're sleeping, that's kimakom sakana. Incredible. The Gemara says, Amra Papa, v'latzeis labeis hakise. What about going out to the bathroom? Kilatzeis laderech dami. That's like going out to travel. So the Gemara says, so is that true? That if you're just sitting in your home, drinking pairs of cups of wine, drinking zugos, that it's not a problem? Vaha Rava, yet I will say Rava, this is very interesting. Rava, when he would drink wine in his home, mane kishure, he would count the beams. In other words, what Rava would do is that he would keep track of the number of cups that he was drinking, and the way he would do it is he would count the cups based on the beams in his home. V'abaye kisha sechad kasa mankit le'ime trei kasi b'trei yodei. And furthermore, Abaye, when he would be drinking in his home, if he would drink 1 cup, his mother would stand right by him with 2 cups in her hands. She never wanted her son, it's a Jewish mother, right? She never wanted her son to drink zugos. So you see what I'm saying? The point over here is that these are people even in their home. And even in their home, they're being careful with zugos. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ki avashasi trei kasi, mankit le'shamei chad kasa. And we'll say, ultimately, again, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, when he was drinking, if he was drinking 2 cups, so ultimately, again, his shamus, his servant, would hold another cup in his hand. So the Gemara says, Chad kasa, mankit le'trei kasi b'yetrei yadei. Or if Rav Nachman was drinking 2 cups, then the shamus would hold 1 cup. Or I'm sorry, opposite. If he was drinking 1 cup, the shamus would hold 2 cups. So I will say the point over here is you see individuals who are makpid on zugos even when drinking in their homes. That contradicts what we just said before. We just said before that zugos are only an issue if you're going out to travel, but if you're sitting in your house, it's not a problem. To which the Gemara says, Adam chashuv shayni. So I'll say a very profound idea. An important person is different. an important person is different. If you look at the Rashbam says this is the third wide line in the Rashbam, last few words on line, Adam Chashav Shaini, Demasri Shedim Nafshaihu La'azuke. Shedim like to go out of their way to harm important people. So I'll say, therefore this idea that an Adam Chashuv is more susceptible ultimately again to Shedim. So we'll say a very profound yisod, which is in general that the greater one is in life, the more we often think that the way it works is that the greater one is kind of the less susceptible they are to the challenges of life. The Gemara says it's just the opposite. Adam chashav shayni. The greater a person is, right? We know the Gemara says that the greater you are, the greater Yetzer Hara is. This is the great anomaly of ruchnius. Everything else in life, when you work on it, you become more proficient. It becomes easier. Ruchnius is the one thing where the greater you are and the harder you work on it, the temptation and challenge grows along with you. Adam chashav shayni. And Adam chashav has to struggle in ways that perhaps a regular person does not. An incredibly profound yisod. Amr Ula, Asara Kosos Imam Mishum Zugos. We'll say, Ula says, so remember again, the concept of Zugos obviously works in pairs. So any even number, Bepashtos, is going to be a problem of Zugos. Now the Gemara is going to say, not necessarily, perhaps that there comes a certain point in time where Zugos are no longer an issue. So for example, the Gemara says, Amr Ula, we'll say first wide line, Kof Yod Amud Aleph 110a. Amr Ula, Asara kosos ain't by mishum zugos. If you drink 10 cups of wine, that is not a problem of zugos. If you drink 10 cups of wine, you have no problems at all. Right? So I'll say, so again, at least you're not going to know about the shadim. So 10 cups of wine ain't by mishum zugos. Ula l'tamei da amar ula. Is supposed to say, so of course, by the way, you understand that of course, remember, they drank wine in a very different way. That was the drink, right? That was their staple drink of any particular meal. So the Gemara says as follows. So Ula says you drink 10 cups of wine, it's not a problem of zugos. Ula tame. Ula goes according to his reasoning, because what does Ula hold? Ula says, Damar Ula, Varna Masni Satana, Asara Kosos, Tikdu Chachamim Bebeis Ha'avel. We'll say this is actually fascinating. I think we referenced this. I feel like I mentioned this yesterday or the day before about the Koshel Tanchumin. So we'll say the Koshel Tanchumin was the big cup of wine that the Avelim would drink upon returning from the cemetery. But in addition to that, there were 10 cups that were actually instituted in the base Avel, right? That were part of Birkas Hamazon. Some of them were drunk during the meal, and some of them were drunk over the course of benching, or as part of the end of benching. Now again, so the rabbis instituted 10 cups of wine in the house of an Avel. So says the Gemara very simply, if you're going to think that if you're going to hold that 10 is a problem of Zugos, then ultimately, again, then how would Chazal ever institute something that would lead one to sakana? So the fact that Chazal instituted 10 cups of wine in the base Avel indicates to us what? That obviously 10 does not have a problem of zugos. Avel, timnya yeshram zugos. But according to Ula, 8 will have a problem of zugos. So 10 does not, but 8 will. Rav Chistav Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Amri Damri Tabayu. So we'll say, if Chizron and Bar Avuna both say, Shalom l'tova mitzaref l'ra lo mitzaref. So we'll say Shalom. Now remember again, this is actually very interesting. So what's Shalom? So we'll say, in Birchas Kohanim, Shalom is the 7th word. V'yasem l'cha Shalom. Shalom is the 7th word. So now what the Gemara is saying is as follows. Chizron and Bar Avuna say that Shalom l'tova mitzaref l'ra lo mitzaref. Shalom ultimately, again, combines for good, but not for bad. We'll say what that means is as follows. If you drink 6 cups of wine and then drink a 7th, great. That 7th cup of wine, by definition, negates any issue of zugos. However, if you then drink an 8th, cup number 7 does not combine. That's what it means. Shalom mitzaref l'tova ve'enu mitzaref l'ra. Shalom ultimately, again, combines for good, to negate the zugos impact of the first 6, but it will not combine ultimately again with cup number 7, or it will not combine with cup number 8 to form a zugos issue. We'll say also another incredible yisod. Shalom l'tova mitzaref l'ra lo mitzaref. We'll say if a person in life is a rodef shalom, if a person runs after, tries to make peace, you're not going to always be successful, but one thing is clear. Shalom l'tova mitzaref. Shalom only causes good things. L'ra'a lo mitzaref. It never causes anything negative. There is never anything to be lost by being a rodef shalom, by running after peace in life. You're not always going to be successful because you need a partner in peace, as they say. But lamaisa, it's never l'ra'a mitzaref. Such an incredible yisod. So the Gemara says, aval shisa, however, against 6 cups, yeshua mishum zugos. So this is interesting. So according to Rav Chisda, you see what's happening over here? Ula says there's no zugos at 10, but there's zugos at 8. Rav Chisda and Rav Huna says there's no zugos at 8, but there's zugos at 6. Okay, Rabba Rav Yossi Demar Tarvayu v'yichuneka letova mitzaref l'ra'a lo mitzaref. So we'll say again, what's v'yichuneka? So interestingly enough, we're going ahead and we're using Birchas Kohanim. Right, so we'll say, so what's v'yichuneka? So remember again, Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yichuneka is word number 5. So the 5th cup that you drink, l'tova mitzaref, which means if you drink a 5th cup of wine, that will negate the zugos impact of the first 4. However, if you then go and drink cup number 6, 5 doesn't combine with 6. L'tova mitzaref, l'ra'a lo mitzaref. Aval arba, yeshua mishum zugos. But again, 4 cups of wine, absolutely have an issue of zugos. Abai v'Rabbi Darmit Habayu. So both say Abai and Rava both say together. V'yishmerecha. V'yishmerecha, remember again, is word number 3. L'tova mitzaref l'ra lo mitzaref, which both say means that what? That Allah says zugos only play a role, are only problematic for 2. But once you get past 2, there's no problem with zugos. So we'll say, what do you see? Something very interesting happens. So you see again a progression. Ula saying zugos are only a problem with 8, but not 10. Rav Chisda and Rav Huna are saying zugos are only a problem with 6 and not 8. Rabba and Rav Yosef are saying it's only a problem with 4 and not 6. And Abaye and Rabba, it's only a problem with 2. So what's happening over here? So we'll say, if you take a look at the Rashbam says something very interesting. He says, in the Rashbam, it's Tivri Hamaschil Rabba v'Rav Yosef. Do you see that? It's 2, 4, 6, 7 lines in the wide lines. Both is incredibly important. Kimo shahayu hadoros zu achazu hayu makilin bezugos v'hochlin upochsin. So we'll say this is really quite fascinating. The Rashbam makes an observation. The opinions mentioned are going down the generations. What the Rashbam points out over here is that earlier generations were more makbid with zugos, but as time went on, people became more makel with zugos. Therefore, again, that's why the last position, which is quote-unquote the most contemporary one, Abaye and Rava, said the truth is zugos is only a problem with 2. But once you're past 2, you don't have to worry about zugos anymore. Trabotai, just to understand, it makes a lot of sense, especially if we're going with the idea that zugos is an issue of dualism. The whole dualism issue is only really with 2. In other words, once you get to a number greater than 2, I understand that I'm in the parsha of zugos, but it's almost as if the hashkafa of zugos is lost on anything more than 2. So by the time we get down the generations and we're up to Abaye and Rava, they're saying, listen, zugos is really only an issue by 2, but not any more than 2. Va'az the Rava l'tamei, Rava goes according to his reasoning. The Rava, afkinu l'rabbanan ba'arba kosos. So let's listen to this. Rava, when his talmidim would come over for a shir, he would go ahead and he would give them 4 cups to drink as they would leave. Right? In other words, they would have 4 cups of wine as they were having the shir. So the Gemara says, and this occurred even, I'll just point out to you, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment, because this is interesting. Rav afkinu ba'arba, pamim harbe kishay niftarim eno hayamashkin, or pam shlo hayamashkin el arba kosos v'niftarin. So this in Israel says, interestingly enough, so it goes on, where was it? Then maybe it was in the Maharsha. I saw this last night. The Maharsha, you'll look at the Maharsha. I'm pretty sure the Maharsha brings down that Rava would give his Talmidim wine. Why would he give them wine? It's interesting. Rava would give him wine to try drinking while learning, because Rava felt that a little bit of wine opens up the heart and would make the Talmidim a bit more receptive to the lessons that he was teaching. So very interesting. In any event, Rava would go ahead and give his Talmidim 4 cups of wine. Afagav de isik Rava bar Livai lo chashle lemilse. So we'll say, interesting enough, even though one time Rava bar Livai, one of his Talmidim, was injured somehow when leaving the shir, and many of the Talmidim attributed his injury ultimately to the fact that he drank zugos in Rava's house. But Rava wasn't concerned. Rava said, no, it's not because of zugos. I'll tell you why he got hurt. I'll tell you why Rava Bar Levi got hurt, said Rava. It's not because of zugos. It's because he's always contradicting me in shir. Right? It's because he's always contradicting me in shir. Right? He always is raising kashas and always contradicting and this, that. So because I want to point out, Rava was saying is obviously you could ask, a person could ask, Talmud could ask, Talmud is supposed to ask questions, but we all know there are different ways to ask questions. Some people ask questions in order to learn, and some people ask questions in order to contradict. So Rava felt that Rava Bar Levi's manner of questioning was disrespectful and didn't really have a place at the shir. Rava felt that's why Rava Bar Levi got injured. Okay, Amr Rav Yosef, get ready. Amr Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef said, Amr li Yosef Shida. Yosef the shade said to me. We'll say this is great, right? First of all, it's just fascinating that the Shadim have a shade with a Yiddish numen, right? The shade with a it's Yosef, right? Yasala the shade. Again, so it's fascinating. By the way, Yosef Shid is quoted other places in Shas. He obviously is a prominent shade. It's just fascinating. So Amrli Yosef Shid. So Yosef said, Yosef the shade said to me, Ashmadai Malka Deshida Mamunahu Akula Zugi. Ashmadai, the king of Shadim, who were introduced to in both, again, brachas as well as gittin. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, so Ashmadai, the king of Shadim, he is the one who is in charge of zugos. In other words, when we speak about Shadim harming someone who drank zugos, that's Ashmadai's purview. So the Gemara says, Umalka lo ikri mezik. And Yosef the shade said, but the good news is, the king doesn't really go out to harm people, right? The king is not called the mazik. So Yosef the shade seems to be saying to Rav Yosef that you don't have to worry so much. I will say it's also interesting that you know I've always understood Rav Yosef is speaking to Yosef the shade. I will say almost like such an incredible metaphor as well, almost as if to say, if you think about it, all of us have this duality within ourselves. I have the Rav Yosef and the Yosef Shida, right? We all have the two parts to our persona, and life is all about which part of your identity you choose to cultivate. I'm not suggesting is here it's two different entities. It's Rav Yosef and Yosef the shade, but I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating that it's the same name. In any event, the Gemara says as follows. So Yosef Shida seems to be telling Rav Yosef, the good news is you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry because Ashmadai is in charge of the shade of the zugos, and ultimately, again, the king's not really going out to harm people. So the Gemara says, "Ikad Amir," an alternate version of this. Damir lahaygi Adraba Malka Raschanahu my deboy of it. An alternate version says, no, it's worse because the king when he gets angry, he could do whatever he wants. After all, Shamelech Poretz Geder La'asos Lo Derech Ve'in Mochem Yadar. We'll say, in halacha, there's this concept, I guess what we would call contemporarily eminent domain. But the truth is, a king's power of eminent domain is even stronger, right? A king could repossess whatever property he wants for whatever purpose he wants. So it shows you the power of the king. So according to this version, Ashmadai is the king. King is prone to outbursts. He could do whatever he wants. So it's even worse that he has the power over Zugos. Okay. Amr Papa, Amr Yosef Shida. So our Papa said, Yosef the shade said to me, betray Katlinon, ba'arba'a lo Katlinon. Ultimately, again, zugos of any number may pose a problem, but it's only zugos of two that ultimately chas v'shalom can get a person killed, not zugos of four. Ba'arba maskinon. So ultimately, again, with four, you could be injured, but chas v'shalom is not a danger to life. Betray. If you drink two, whether you drank two intentionally or unintentionally, you are prone to danger. But with four, the problem is only b'mezid but not b'shogeg. V'i ishtali v'ikri v'nafki maitakanti. So we'll say this is incredible. And tell me, what happens if a person accidentally drank zugos, right? We'll say I didn't come to shir, and so I'm drinking zugos tonight, and now I'm doing the daf as I'm drinking my zugos, and I said, oy vavoy, I just drank 2 cups of wine. Now what? So of course, option number one, we'll say if you just realize that you just drank zugos, then option number one is what? Right? So you can drink another glass, right? That's always a good option, right? Always, when in doubt, drink another glass of wine. Or possibility number 2 is stay home. Now, the interesting part is, and I don't know this from the Gemara, but the interesting part is we said staying home there's no negative effect of zugos, but going to sleep there is a problem, there's a challenge, it's dangerous. Again, how long you have to wait after zugos before going to sleep, I don't know, I didn't see it, I can't say that I looked into it, but that I didn't see. Alright, so but I forgot, I didn't realize, I drank zugos. Now what do I do? This is incredible. My takante, here we go, this is what you do. Linkot zikva diyada diyamina biyadei dismale. Take your right thumb and put it in your left hand. V'zakva dismale biyadei diyamine, and your left thumb in your right hand. V'nei mahachi, and this is what you have to say. Asun v'ana hatlasa, you and me, we are three. V'ishmiale da'amar asun v'ana haraba, and if you hear a voice back that says, you and I are four, neimale asun v'ana hachamisha, then say, you and I are five. And if you hear a voice back that says, you and I are six, then say, no, you and I are seven. So the Gemara says, this once happened to someone, admeya. Now the voice that you hear, the Rashbam says, is the shade. It's the shade who is allowed to harm you after the consumption of zugos. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says, and you have to keep going. Now, obviously, you see what this is. If I'm the individual drinking the zugos, I keep saying the odd number. Right? The voice that comes back is the shade who keeps saying the even number. Keep going. This, the Gemara says, until you get to 100. So the Gemara says, Hava uvda admeya v'chad upakashida. So there was once a person who was going back and forth with a shade until 101, until the shade finally exploded. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, what does this mean? So I'll just tell you something interesting that I saw. The Ben Yehoyada comments on this, and I thought it's such a beautiful idea. Specifically, this. Now, again, the back and forth, the even odd numbers that we understand, right? What I'm trying to do is neutralize the power of zugos. What about the thumb, the whole thumb thing? So listen to what the Ben Yehoyada writes. He says, "Nira li dahaguda romez li Yisrael kimo shechasam b'makom acher umaniach umutzna gudol yamin biyad smol v'gudol smol biyad yamin kedei lichlol." HaChesed v'hagvura lematek hagvura b'chesed. So we'll say the Ben Yehoyada writes that the thumb represents Klal Yisrael. I don't know why he says that come out like I wrote somewhere else, but he doesn't tell us where the somewhere else is. The thumb represents Klal Yisrael. The right. Well, sometimes the right represents different things. Sometimes the right could represent chesed, sometimes the right could represent gvura. So let's assume for a moment that the right represents chesed and the left represents din. By going ahead and taking the thumb, Klal Yisrael, and inserting them one into the other, what I'm doing is I'm saying, Ribono Shel Olam, even if there is din upon me now, even if there's divine judgment upon me now, I'm asking you to blunt the divine judgment ultimately with chesed. I will say what it's doing is as follows also. What it's representing is the idea, and this is really the antidote to zugos. The problem with zugos is it looks like dualism. The moment you allow yourself to become, I'll call theologically weak, religiously weak, is when you potentially give other powers control over you. But Lamaisa, the moment you pledge your allegiance back to the Ribono Shel Olam, then those other kochos have no ability over you. So the moment you go in and you take your thumbs and you insert them one into the other hand, and you recognize Chalish Baruch Hu, in your hand is Gevura, in your hand is Din, in your hand is Chesed. It's up to you. Nothing could harm me, and nothing could do anything to me without you, Ribono Shel Olam. So the moment after Zugos, you repledge your allegiance to the Ribono Shel Olam, is the moment that you neutralize the power of Zugos. So we'll say it's an incredible yisod. That's sometimes the way to deal with any life adversity. Sometimes the first thing I have to do in the midst of adversity is once again re-energize my connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Re-pledge my allegiance to the Ribono Shel Olam. Ribono Shel Olam, you control everything. I'm going to put in my ishtadlus, I'm going to do my part, but everything is up to you. And the moment you cast your lot with the Ribono Shel Olam is the moment that often outside forces are unable to have an effect on you. Incredible Gemara. So let's go right there. Amra Meimer, Amri li Reshtina dinashim kashvanios. Maimar said, I was once having a conversation with the head of the sorceresses, right? A sorceress woman. I was having, not just with anyone, the Rebbe of the sorceress women. So the Gemara says, and she told me as follows, Hayman de pagabu benashon kashvanios, if a man ever comes across a sorceress, Neima hachi, this is what you should say. Chari chamimi b'dikuli bazya lipumaychu nashi decharshaya. This is what you should say. Hot excrement in torn baskets should be poured into your mouth, sorceress woman. Have a good day, right? Whatever. This is. Now, both say, interestingly enough, it appears that you're actually supposed to be proactive in saying this to the sorceress who you run into. Okay, interesting idea. So the Gemara says as follows: Karach karchayu, and again it goes on. This is all the statement you should make. Karach karchayu, you should become bald because often the women would perform sorcery with their hair. Parach prachayu. Your breadcrumbs should scatter. We're going to see this is all a reference ultimately to the very things in which sorcery was often committed. Your breadcrumbs should scatter. Amud Beis, Iv dur tavlanaichu. Your tavlin, your which means again your spices. These are just all the things that they would use for their kishuf. Your spices should go ahead and be scattered. Paracha zeka lemorika charata dinakisu nashim kashfanios. Literally translated, the parcha zika lamaraika, the saffron that you use for your spells, the wind should scatter them. Adechanani v'chananaichi lo asichu lego hashta da asisi lego karchanani v'chanchani. So literally what you say is, when you gave me favor, I gave you favor, which essentially means that as long as we stayed out of each other's way, all is fine. But now that we have crossed paths, at the end of the day, I have no compassion upon you. Actually, if you look at Rashi, both in this daf, it's Rashbam on the right side, Rashi's on the left side. Take a quick look at Rashi for just a moment on the left side. V'hashta dasisi lago karchanani v'chanenechi hoyel ubasi beinechem yodiani sheniskaru rachamichem me'alai v'gam rachami niskaru shelochasti al atzmi. So we'll say, so the individual says, listen, while you were doing your thing, I was doing my thing, our paths don't cross, it's fine, but now that we've crossed paths, I realize that I have not been careful enough to avoid you, and I have no illusion that you will be compassionate upon me. Okay? So we'll say, so that's the source. So we'll say, now listen to this. So we'll say, now you begin to see how this kind of started with Ula and working our way amongst all of the various opinions down the generations. We went from 10 is a problem of Zugos, or I should say 10 is not a Zugos. 8 is only a problem of Zugos to only 2. Now the Gemara says, listen to this. In Eretz Yisrael, they were not makbid on Zugim. Right? They were makbid on Zugos. They did not feel that drinking in pairs was a problem. But say now, what I just want to point out is as follows. Now, what does that mean they weren't makbid on it? So I just want to point out that, remember, shadim also are a manifestation, or I should say, the ability for shadim to interact in this world is also a function of the inherent kedusha of this world. That's why, for example, the Gemara says, where can shadim be found most often? In the Beis Medrash, right? The Gemara says, why is it that the clothing of Talmidei Chachamim wears out if Talmidei Chacham are just sitting and learning? How do their clothing wear out? Remember, what does the Gemara say? Because the shadim rub against them. Shadim are drawn to kedusha, which is why that the less kedusha there is in the world, ultimately, again, the less manifest shadim. Rabbi say, by the way, this is the opinion also of the Sefer HaChinuch and others. Remember, again, I mentioned the Rambam. The Rambam is of the opinion that all of this stuff, shadim and kishuf, it's not real. Almost everyone else argues on the Rambam and says, but what happened to these forces today? Again, remember, their counterbalances to Kedusha. Wherever there's Kedusha, there's also Tumah. So wherever there's greater Kedusha, there's Shadim, there's Kishuf. If Tumah lessens, so Niskatnu Adoros, as we get further away from our Sinai, a certain level of global Kedusha lessens. Therefore, some of these other forces are not felt as well. So when it says in Eretz Yisrael they weren't makbid on Zugos, again, they felt that the presence of Shadim, the ability of Shadim to interact with us, just really is no longer present. Rav Dimi Ben Arda Kapid Afilu arishuma dechavisa. So we'll say, on one hand, in Eretz Yisrael in general, they weren't makbid on zugos. Yet you have Rav Dimi of Narda, so in Bavel, and he was so makbid on zugos, we'll say, not just with drinking wine, but anything in pairs. So we'll say, on wine barrels, they used to go ahead and make a marking, right? So you could see how many sa'ah, or whatever measurement they used, how many lugin inside of the barrel. He was careful never to have an even number of notch marks. That's how careful he was with zugos. Hava uvda, because one time again they had an even number of notch marks. Upaka chavisa, and ultimately again the barrel exploded, and they attributed the barrel explosion to shadin. I'm about to say, look how the Gemara ends, not ends, but look how the Gemara says. Aklala de milsa. The rule is called the kapid kapti bahadei. Whoever's makbid on shadim, the shadim are makbid on him. Uda lo kapid. Lo kapti bihadei, and if you're not makbid, the shadim are not makbid on you. In other words, I will say, this is by the way, such an incredible statement. If you're worried about shadim, shadim have an impact on you. If you're not worried about shadim, shadim don't have an impact on you. But I'll say, by the way, it's such an incredible yesod, not just by shadim. You understand what this lesson of the Gemara is? So many times in life we have fears, and those fears immobilize us, and those fears prevent us from accomplishing. It is only the fears that you allow to take hold of you which have the ability to immobilize you. But if you don't allow the fear to take hold of you, it cannot hold you back. I will say such an incredible yesod, because so many people are paralyzed into inaction because of a fear. Whatever it is, a fear of the unknown, a fear of failure. Whatever you allow yourself to be fearful of, and whatever you allow if you allow your fear to take hold, then it'll hold you back. But if you do not, if you're not makbid on the fear, if you don't allow it to take hold, then halacha l'maaseh cannot hold you back. An incredible yesod. However, the Gemara says, Umiyu l'mecha shmibai. But it's good to be choshesh. So I think you're single a little bit, kind of like hedging our bets a little bit. In other words, that you don't, what the Gemara says, you don't have to be makbid on it, but maybe you should be careful. In other words, when it's easy enough to avoid it, so says the Gemara, avoid it. You don't have to live your life worrying about it. So we'll say, so again, this is important because clearly it's interesting for us to learn Gemaras like this, because we go through a whole Gemara speaking about zugos, yet as far as we're concerned, we're not makbid on zugos. Right? Remember again, I just want to point out, remember how this whole discussion started. How do we get into this? Dalikoso, zugos. Okay, so the Gemara said, well, maybe even if you're makbid on zugos, that's not a problem. Why? Because leil shimurimu, there's a protection. But again, so much, Julia was telling me this yesterday, I have to share, so much of what we do is zugos. We have so many things that are done in pairs, that are done in even numbers. So it's clear that in general, again, as the generations go on, we're not makbid on zugos. But I will say, but the takeaway message is very profound. Only the fears that you allow to hold you back, But the fears that you're able to overcome, ultimately, again, can't hold you back. An incredible yisod. Kiyosar Avdimi Amar, Shtei Beitzim, Shtei Agozim, Shtei Yeshua, Medavar Acher, Halacha Lamoshe Misinai. So Avdimi said, 2 eggs, 2 nuts, 2 kishuin or gourds or cucumbers, Vidavar Acher, and 2 of something else. Now the Rashan says 2 of something else was just another vegetable or food item. Is a halacha l'moshe miseh chatting makbid on zugos. Now we'll say bipashtos. He doesn't mean literally that it is a halacha l'moshe misinai, because again, no one seems to be suggesting that the concept of zugos are a halacha l'moshe, but it means it's a very ancient tradition. The only problem is we don't know what that other thing was. Therefore, the gazer abanan bekulu zugi mishum davar acher. Therefore, again, I will say, pretty much the concept of zugos almost seems like it begins from the statement of Rav Dimi, who says that there is this ancient practice, makbid on zugos. He enumerates a number of things, and he says, oh, by the way, there's one other thing in the list, I just can't remember what the other thing was. And therefore, again, because he can't remember what the other thing was, Chazal were careful with this. So we'll say, in general, anything that has an element of sakana associated with it, we're always more machmer with sakana than anything else. And therefore, aloch lamaisa, we have to be careful with zugos for everything. V'hada amran asara timni ashisa arba imam shem zugi lo aman el leinyan mazikin I'm sorry. Good. I v'hada amran asara timni ashisa arba imam shem zugi. But I will say that which we said before, that 10, 8, 6, 4 don't have a problem of zugos. Lo aman el leinyan mazikin. I will say, now this is very interesting. The Gemara now makes a distinction ultimately between zugin, which is an issue of kishuf, which is an issue of Shedim and Kishuf, which is sorcery. So we'll say the conclusion of the Gemara is twofold. Number one, it appears that Zugos, in terms of Shedim, are only going to have a problem with two, right? Only literally a pair, two. That's where the Shedim seem to have a hold, at least contemporarily. And even then, it's a shaila if you're makbid on it, not makbid on it, but the Gemara seems to indicate that you should be choshesh with it. However, I will say, sometimes Zugin could leave a person vulnerable, even with larger numbers, but not a function of Shedim. That's a function of Kishuf. That's a function of sorcery. So apparently, again, there's the Zugin of Shedim and the Zugin of Kishuf. The Zugin of Shedim, only a problem with two. The Zugin of Kishuf could be a problem even with a large number. Also, listen to this. Great story. Ki dahu gavra, the garshla dvisu. There was a man who divorced his wife. Azli, in siba lechen vina. The woman went on, she got remarried, and she married a shopkeeper. Good, mazel tov. Every day, her ex-husband would come into her new husband's store to drink wine. Apparently, again, it used to be common that you would go into the general store. The general store also went ahead and sold wine, and you were able to sample the wine. So we'll say, again, there are always guys who just came in to quote-unquote sample, right? They sampled day after day after day. They just can never make up their mind about what to buy. So what would happen? It could also be that they bought wine to drink inside of the store. So what happens? So the ex-wife was apparently very angry at her ex-husband. So every day when he would come in, she would try to do some kishuv, right? She would try to do some sorcery to harm him. The problem was he was never vulnerable to her kishuv. Why not? Because he was makbid on zugos. Because he would never drink an even number cups of wine. Remember, Sir Bose, this is what we were saying before, that apparently zugos make you vulnerable. At 2, you're vulnerable to shadim. Above 2, there's no longer a shade issue, but there absolutely is, at least according to Gemara here, a kishuf issue. So she would try to harm him every day. He was drinking wine with her kishuf. But because he was makbid on zugos, ultimately, again, she could not. Well, listen to this. Yom Achad, one day, ishti tuva, he drank a lot. V'lo have yada, kama shasi, ad shissar. So we'll say what happened, and he didn't know how much he drank. So we'll say, get ready for this. Ad shissar havitzayel v'yizdar benavshe. So really, he was good until cup number 16, right? So 16, he was holding cup with what? Literally, right? Holding cup with what? With what glass of wine he was up to? You know, it happens sometimes. After 16, you get a little bit foggy. It can happen. So what happens? Mikan ve'elach lo havitzayel v'lo yizdar benavshe. After cup number 16, so he became a little bit foggy and wasn't sure what number he was up to. So we'll say, so what happens? Afikse bezuga. Ultimately, again, she got him. So he didn't even realize it, but he ended up drinking an even number. So kiava azil gaspeota. So what happened? So because he drank zugos, so she was able to get him with the sorcery, and she cast some type of spell on him. Kiava azil, as he left the store, gaspeahu tayo. There was an Arab. Tayo is an Arab merchant. There was a merchant. There was an Arab who saw him. Amrle gavra katilahu da azil hacha. A dead man is walking here. So apparently, again, for whatever the reason, this Tayo was able to see that the Kishuv had worked on this individual. So ultimately, again, the Arabs said, dead man walking. Azil chabke ledikule. He went in, the ex-husband went and he grabbed onto the palm tree. Tzavach dikla upakahu. He grabbed onto the palm tree, whatever this means. The palm tree cried out, upakahu, and the man exploded. So the idea is the kisha first of all, take away from the story is that even if you go with the idea that zugos by shadim is only by 2, apparently again zugos by kishuf still has a power even in greater number. Incredible. Amr Rav Avira, karos vikikaros ema mishum zugos. So Rav Avira said that literally again karos means plates of food. Kikaros are loaves. Don't have a problem of zugos. So we'll say this is interesting. So now defining a little bit more, and the progression here is very interesting because we just got finished by saying in Eretz Yisrael they're not makbid on zugos, and ultimately again you don't have to be makbid on zugos in general because shadim can only have a power over you if you allow them to have a power over you. But lamaisa again, now we're redefining a little bit more. So if Avira says karos ki karos don't have zugos, kol demilsa kol shegamru b'dei adam emem mishum zugos. Interesting enough, the Gemara says as follows. Anything that is man-made, doesn't have an issue of zugos. Only things that ultimately, again, gamru b'dei shamayim, that are finished by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, when it comes to food, ultimately, again, have an issue of zugos. So we'll say, again, a lot to say in this as well about, remember, especially if you go at the idea that zugos is an issue of dualism, right? Then it's only going to be that which occurs naturally in the world that has an issue of zugos, but those things which are man-made do not have a problem of zugos. Chanos in b'mishum zugos. So we'll say furthermore again, if you drink wine in one store and then go to a different store, there's no problem of zugos. In other words, the act of going store to store, by definition, disrupts, right, prevents the two cups of wine from joining together. Nimlach in b'mishum zugos. We'll say same thing with nimlach. Nimlach means if you have one cup of wine and then decide to have another glass of wine, those two don't combine together. Zugos are only a problem when one had intention to drink two. Oreach in b'mishum zugos. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, so oreach, if you're a guest somewhere, there's also no issue of zugos. That's the same idea. Because if you're a guest somewhere, you don't necessarily know how much wine you're going to have, and therefore we'll say even so by hilchos brachos. By hilchos brachos, again, an oreach could often require another bracha because he never knows what's coming. In other words, it's not mistarif. Isha in bar mishum zugos. Similarly, again, a woman is not subject to the danger of zugos. We'll discuss why that is in just a bit. So the Gemara says, Isha chashuva kaishinin. This is very interesting. But if she's an important woman, then she can be prone to the danger of zugos. We saw the Isha chashuva, by the way, by a seiba as well. I will say, no, to have to stop over here. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem. We'll finish up zugos Emirat Hashem tomorrow and define some of these categories that we just mentioned. Shkoyach.